All right, welcome. Here we go. We're shifting gears now. And, of course, Bob Sergeant Schwartz joining us here in studio for the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. We have a special guest waiting on the phone.
Yes, we do. And good morning, gentlemen. I'd like to welcome Bayan, calling from Washington, D.C. So, Bayan, welcome to Missoula, Montana.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this very much.
Now, Bayan, please forgive me. I must embarrass you by reading your bio. So you don't have to listen if you don't want to, because there's a lot of good stuff here. Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman is the Kurdistan Regional Government representative of the United States of a forward-looking emerging democracy that saw its first free elections in 1992. The Kurdistan Regional Government seeks to build a federal, pluralistic, democratic, and united Iraq. Key to her role as representative are strengthening ties between Kurdistan region and the United States, advocating the government's position on a wide array of political economic matters, and promoting coordination and partnership between the Kurdistan region and the U.S. by encouraging inward investment, which is important to the revival and stability of Kurdistan and Iraq as a whole. Prior to the appointment of KRG representative to the U.S., Ms. Abdul Rahman was the High Representative to the United Kingdom. She was born in Baghdad. Her family briefly lived in Iran in the mid-1970s before moving to Britain in 1976. She is a history graduate from London University. So we welcome you.
Thank you very much.
So I'd like to just open this up with, first I had the privilege of meeting with Bayan in Washington here just recently, and her intelligence, wit, and charm just exudes itself in terms of her representation of Kurdistan. So I can't think of a finer person to be having a discussion with today about this issue. So Bayan, welcome. And please, for the benefit of the audience, can you give us a background and description of what is the role and responsibility that you have as a representative of the Kurdish Republic?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that glorious introduction. Are you sure you're talking to the right person?
Well, that was my impression at the moment. If you're going to change our view here.
I apologize, all our fanfare trumpets were broken,
Yes,
but
yes.
we'll get them fixed maybe by the end of the show.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you also for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you and to your listeners in Montana. So your question was, what is the role of the Kurdistan Regional Government representation in the United States, and my role as the representative to the United States?
Correct.
First, I should begin by clarifying that our office, the KRG representation, represents only Kurdistan in Iraq. As your listeners may know, Kurdistan is actually divided between four countries: Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. And Kurdistan in Iraq is recognized as a region. We have our own parliament, our own prime minister, our own president. I can give similar examples around the world. Perhaps Scotland, within the United Kingdom, has a similar setup. Scotland also has a first minister. They don't call her prime minister. They have a parliament and so on. Also, Quebec in Canada has a special status within the country. So Kurdistan region in Iraq has that status. And so in addition to the Prime Minister, President, Parliament, and various ministries, we also have representations abroad, which are our regional equivalent of an embassy. So our office here in Washington, D.C., and my position as the representative are very, very similar to an embassy and an ambassador, but instead of representing a sovereign state, we represent a region within Iraq, and that is the Kurdistan region.
Oh, well, I'm curious how things have changed for the Kurdistan regional government after the tumult with ISIS. It's my understanding that ISIS has kind of helped to separate the functioning government of Iraq from the Kurdistan regional government in many ways.
Well, I think it is true that, and many people don't like to admit it, but we have to look at the realities on the ground. It is true that with the invasion by ISIS of roughly a third of Iraq at the time, that territory has now reduced, but roughly a third of Iraq was partitioned, and You have I'm speaking in very broad terms, the Sunni Arab area of Iraq, much of it in the hands of ISIS. You have the Kurdistan region of Iraq, which is controlled by the Kurdish Peshmerga, our soldiers, and the Kurdish government. And then you have the rest of Iraq, which I guess is under the control of Baghdad. So certainly it is a fact that ISIS has changed the facts on the ground, and that it's a fiction, frankly, to talk about Iraq as one unified sovereign state. But this is a very politically hot potato, and I'm sure people in the U.S. government would disagree with my assessment, but we have a very good relationship with the U.S. government, and we are very, very grateful to the United States for supporting us in the fight against ISIS militarily and hopefully also soon financially, because the most negative impact of ISIS in Iraq, well, I don't know, I say the most negative. There are so many negative impacts.
Pick one.
From ISIS in Iraq. First, of course, the genocide against the Christian community, the Yazidis, and other components of Iraq, the humanitarian catastrophe that ISIS has caused with millions of people displaced. In Kurdistan region alone, we are taking care of about 1.5 million Iraqi displaced people and about 300,000 Syrians. So that's almost 2 million people that we are taking care of. Our population is only 5 million.
Bayan, my apologies as we have to go to a commercial break. When we come back, one of the things that I want you to kind of give us an overview about is it's the 100-year anniversary of Sykes-Picot. So when we come back from this break, could you please give us some of that background and history, because it's so important to understanding where we are today.
And again, the Montana World Affairs Council, this quite literally takes our listeners all over the world and brings them right here to Missoula. We'll continue. We have 3 lines open. If you have a question or comment, we'd love to hear from you. I'm sure Bayan would as well. 721-1290 is our number. Stay with us. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, and it's the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, is joining us from Washington, D.C., and you just asked a question a moment ago.
Yeah, Bayan was describing conditions right now in northern Iraq, but there's a long history that precedes this. So I've asked her to please, being the 100th anniversary of Sykes-Picot, to give us some insight and understanding of what that agreement was and what was the effect of that as we bring it to the present.
Well, you're right, absolutely. We are marking the 100th anniversary of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and there's also another commemoration this year, which is the 25th anniversary of Operation Provide Comfort. But let me first deal with Sykes-Picot. So Mr. Sykes and Mr. Picot were a French and a British gentleman who 100 years ago drew the map of the Middle East. It was effectively after the First World War. They wanted to break up the Ottoman Empire, and they wanted to carve up the Middle East so that the French and the British would each have their area of influence. Now, the map that they drew isn't necessarily the map of the Middle East today, but it was the beginning, and it was essentially the thinking of the colonial powers at the time that really had such a devastating impact on Kurdistan, and I would say much of the Middle East. And there are many of us who would argue that a great deal of the instability in Iraq, since its creation, Iraq is about a 90-year-old state and has never been a stable country, has hardly ever had a peaceful transfer of power from one party to another, and has been a country in a state of war either against its own people, committing genocide against its own people, or at war with its neighbors. And for us Kurds, we see Sykes-Picot as a great injustice to the people of Kurdistan. It is one of the reasons why the people of Kurdistan are divided among these 4 countries. There are other contributing factors and historic decisions as well. So it's not entirely Sykes-Picot. But Sykes-Picot has come to symbolize all of those things that were wrong about outside powers making decisions for people in an area of the world without taking into account tribal factors, linguistic factors, religious and ethnic backgrounds, and just doing things because it suited the superpowers of the time. So for us, Iraqi Kurds, we are saying it is the 100th anniversary of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and enough is enough. It is time that the people of Iraqi Kurdistan were able to express their self-determination. Every nation, every people around the world has the right to express its self-determination, to decide its destiny. And we in Iraq, we Kurds in Iraq, have never been asked, do you want to be part of Iraq? We were lumped together. It has been an unhappy marriage. There have been repeated acts of genocide, the use of chemical weapons, the Anfal campaign, the killing of 5,000 people in the city of Halabja through chemical bombardment, and now ISIS, and the massacre of the Yazidis and Christians and many, many others. And so we are saying that we want to have a referendum so that the people of Kurdistan and Iraq can voice their view. Do they want to be part of Iraq, or do they want a different future?
May I ask you a question about that? Now, it's my understanding that ancient Kurdistan, and actually you even mentioned this, that it stretches not only in Iraq, but through Iran, Syria, and Turkey. How far would you like this Kurdish self-determining state to reach?
Well, you know, when we talk about being Kurdish, there are two identities that each of us carry as a Kurd. I am Kurdish, but I'm also Iraqi. But my husband is Kurdish. He is Iranian because he happened to be born in a part of Kurdistan that falls under an Iranian state. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was Syrian, but of course she was also Kurdish. And I have many relatives who still are considered Syrian, Turkish, Iranian, and Iraqi. But we all identify ourselves to each other as Kurds. So we have to always live with these two realities. Every Kurd, wherever they're from, wants an independent state. But the reality is those borders have had an impact on the economic and political and even social development of the Kurds in each of those countries.
What makes someone a Kurd? They don't have a shared language. They don't have a shared country. They don't have a shared religion, as far as I know. What is it that makes someone Kurdish?
We do share some of those things, actually. You're right, we don't have a shared official state. We do have a shared language, but our language has two dialects. And it's true that maybe 50 years ago, somebody who spoke one dialect and heard the other dialect for the first time would not necessarily have understood that person. But the impact or the advance of radio and then television and now satellite television has changed all of that. There are now many TV stations that broadcast in Kurdish, and you can watch them anywhere. You can even watch them in Montana. And so Kurds around the world are able to watch the news or TV shows or listen to the radio in their own language, and they're able to hear both dialects. So that in this day and age, the two dialects are very easily understood by everybody. So we do have a shared language. We have shared customs, a shared history that goes beyond these borders and beyond Sykes-Picot. And we have shared aspirations. And our aspirations are to protect Kurdish rights, whether these are political, administrative, cultural rights. We believe, for example, that the Kurdish language should no longer be denied. In some countries, speaking Kurdish was banned until very recently. You couldn't give your child a Kurdish name until recently. So all of us share those aspirations. And as I said, every Kurd in their heart wants an independent state.
Hang on to that for a moment. Bob, go ahead.
I have a couple of questions, so I understand we need to go to a break. But when we come back, could you please first make a distinction that the Kurds are not Arab? So people need to understand that in terms of Iraq, we have the Arab population, Kurdish population, very different in terms of their background. And then could you also discuss what the state of the institutional accountability is in Kurdistan in terms of how it's been set up, how it's nurtured, how civil society acts, and also what is the economic advantages that you have in Kurdistan that make you a viable potential state?
Not only that, but we have Alan on the line who wants to visit with you, so we'll get his call on when we come back. Stay with us. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. The Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman is on the phone with us right now. We have callers who have been waiting very patiently to visit with you. So, Alan, you're on with Byron. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I have a series of questions. First question, has there ever been a Kurdish homeland?
Bayan, if you would, please.
Yes, there hasn't been a Kurdish state, but we have to remember that the idea of a sovereign state, nation state, is really 100, 150 years old. Some people say that the Medes are the ancestors of the Kurds, so you may have heard of the Mede Empire in ancient times.
Okay, have the Kurds identified a territory, an area that they would like as their homeland now?
Well, the Kurdish areas in all of those four countries are very clear. There are historic maps that designate where the Kurds lived, even in those times. Of course, there's been movement of people, some voluntary and a great deal of it involuntary. Forced migration in Iraq, for example, there was a policy that was called Arabization. So towns, villages, whole governorates, provinces, the demographics were changed so that the number of Arabs would increase, and the Kurds were literally forced out of their homes. So there are ancient maps. Even today, it's very easy to work out what are the Kurdish areas inside Iraq, but also in those other countries.
Okay, now, what kind of a historical relationship have the Kurds had with the Sunni and the Shia? In Iraq, you know, to be honest, as a people-to-people relationship, it's always been good. Even though, just referring to a question that we had just before the commercial break, Kurds are not Arabs. We are a distinct race. Our language is not of the same family as the Arabic language. Arabic language is Semitic. Kurdish is Indo-European. So ethnically, we are not in the same group as the Arabs. But in terms of people-to-people relationships, there are many intermarriages. There are a lot of companies where the partners are Kurds and Arabs. The issue has always, with us in Iraqi Kurdistan, has always been with the Iraqi regime or the government in Baghdad. So our relationship on a ground level, grassroots level, has always been good. Okay, are you getting any support through the United Nations or the United States for the Kurdish state?
For the Kurdish state, no. We are getting support from the United States and the UN to deal with the humanitarian crisis that we have because of ISIS. And, of course, the U.S. is helping us militarily. If it wasn't for the assistance that we're getting from the United States, the airstrikes, the weapons, the ammunition, the training, our Peshmerga, who were very, very brave but were very under-equipped, would not be able to stand up against ISIS. So that's the kind of help we're getting. But in terms of talking about independence, nobody is helping us.
Alan, I got to get one more call in, okay?
That's fine. That was the end.
Thanks for the call. Bobby, you're on Talkback with Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman. Go ahead.
Hi. Okay, so the last thing you're talking about is basically what I was going to ask. Our government has seemed to support the Muslim Brotherhood, who are brutal, and they do nothing about ISIS. I mean, a little bit, but a little too late and too little. And I've seen a couple documentaries with interviews from people who are in the Kurdish army, generals, like that. they say that they can protect, and everybody runs to the Kurds for protection, Christians and Muslims alike, and they protect everybody. Everybody's allowed to have their own faith. And I am wondering what you think, President Obama, why he will only give humanitarian aid when the Kurds say they will be the boots on the ground, why he will not support them so they can help everybody, so they can stay in their own country, which is most of them want. So I'd like to hear your answer to that. Thank you.
Thanks for the call, Bobby. So go ahead, Bayan.
Well, I don't want to speak on behalf of President Obama or even the State Department, so I think that question is better placed to them.
We'll delete all emails after this conversation. Don't worry about it.
Well, I'll put it this way. You know, President Obama, we are grateful to President Obama. After all, it is he who ordered the airstrikes. It is his decision that the airstrikes took place in August 2014, and the Yazidi massacre and genocide was prevented from continuing. And also, as I said just before this lady called, it is the U.S. that is leading the coalition against the ISIS and is providing us with the training and weapons and so on. It is true that our military, the Peshmerga, are asking for heavy weapons. Sometimes we are very low on ammunition stocks, and this is a real live war. Every day, ISIS attacks the front line. We have a 650-mile front line against ISIS. It's a very long front that has to be manned at every stage. And every day ISIS attacks at least in one place, if not several places. And of course they also try to attack through terrorist activities as well. So it is true that definitely our military would like to have, for example, anti-tank weapons, would like to have night vision goggles, because many of the attacks by ISIS happen under cover of darkness or under cover of fog, where the airstrikes and our Peshmerga response can be more difficult. So there are issues around weapons and so on, but I really don't think we should lose sight of what the United States is doing to support us.
Okay, and with that, we had to take a break. So go ahead, Bob.
I just want to say about that, respecting your position, I can speak as a U.S. citizen. We're playing a very dangerous game here in this country because the effectiveness of the Peshmerga fighters are such that by giving them heavy weapons, giving them more ammunition and effective ways to fight ISIS, what we're concerned about is they're going to be too effective. We have Iraq that we're dancing with. We have Turkey that we're dancing with. There's other allies in the region. So if the Kurdish fighters become so effective in driving ISIS out, it only bolsters their case in many ways for independence and for a larger place at the table. So we're playing this delicate balancing act here, but give them the weapons that they need, and I believe you will see a much more effective rollback of ISIS.
We're going to come right back. Dave is on the line, and we can't. Bayan can't stay with us for the whole hour, so we're going to find out just how long she can stay. We'll be right back. 721-1290 is the number. John King over there, Bob Seidenschwartz over here. I'm Peter Christian. Joining us on the phone from Washington, Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman. Now, we're right in the middle of...
Yeah, we've got... I want to bring up something here that I'd like Bayan to give us some insight and understanding about, which is Operation Provide Comfort. So in the time that we have left, in addition to John's important question, can you please give us some background on this, Bayan?
Yes. Well, I'm very happy to say that it is the 25th anniversary of Operation Provide Comfort. So what happened was in 1991, after Saddam had invaded Kuwait and the United States-led coalition liberated Kuwait and pushed Saddam's forces out, there was an uprising in Iraq against Saddam Hussein in the northern part of Iraq, in Kurdistan, and in the Shia south. Saddam, unfortunately, was still allowed to use many of his weapons, his helicopter gunships, even though he'd been defeated in Kuwait. In the peace agreement or the end of hostilities agreement with the U.S., he was still allowed to use those weapons. And, of course, he turned them against the population. And don't forget this is spring 1991, exactly 3 years after Saddam had used chemical weapons against the city of Halabja. 5,000 men, women, and children.
We've lost connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and drop the line when she calls back.
Hopefully she'll call back.
try to get her on.
Well, let's take our break now.
Okay, sounds good.
So we'll come right back, and hopefully she'll call back, and we'll get her right back on. So stay with us. Okay, we've got her back, ladies and gentlemen. So let's get right back to the phone and say hello to Bayan. Now, you're right in the middle of Operation.
Bayan, would you please continue with your insight into Operation Provide Comfort, please?
I will, and I apologize, I got cut off. So there was an uprising in Kurdistan. Saddam turned his weapons on the population. This was only 3 years after he had used chemical weapons in Halabja. And even though Halabja is the most famous incident, it was actually one of over 200 instances where Saddam's military used chemical weapons against the civilian population in Kurdistan. So the Kurds all fled. It was a very harsh winter. Millions, and I mean millions of people, fled to the mountains on the border with Turkey and Iran. People, and particularly the elderly and children, died of starvation and exposure. And I should also say my grandfather died in that journey. But he was one of thousands, so it wasn't a special case. And the United States, Britain, and France, with the help of Turkey, which allowed them to use its air bases, launched Operation Provide Comfort. And it was the biggest military humanitarian operation at that time, and possibly since. On a huge scale, humanitarian assistance was airdropped on the thousands, maybe potentially 2 million people who were stranded on these mountain passes with nothing except the clothes that they were wearing. And eventually a safe haven was created, and the people were encouraged to come back to their towns, and they did. And then the United States and Britain instigated the no-fly zone over Kurdistan from 1991 onwards. And it actually continued until 2003 when the liberation of Iraq took place. And for us Kurds, Operation Provide Comfort is so important for many reasons. One, it saved thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives. Potentially 2 million people could have just never come back home. And so it saved lives and people returned home. It established a no-fly zone over Kurdistan that was maintained throughout both Democrat and Republican administrations. And then it allowed the Kurdish people to live slightly outside of Saddam's grasp. He was still the president of Iraq, and he still played his nasty, brutal, cruel games. But we at least had some form of protection under that protective umbrella, which began in 91. In 92, we held our first ever elections in Kurdistan region. As a result of those elections, we created the Kurdistan Parliament, we created the Kurdistan Regional Government, and all of the institutions that grew out of that. This is why, for us, Operation Provide Comfort is so significant. And the final reason I want to touch on why it's significant for us is because we see it as the beginning of this strong relationship that we have with the United States. I have met so many retired generals and still serving military personnel who were involved in Operation Provide Comfort. And all of them tell me that in their military career, this was the highlight. And for us Kurds, it is also a highlight of our recent history. And I think it signifies the beginning of this very, very strong relationship and gratitude that we have towards the United States.
I want to pivot from this military engagement with the Kurdish people, obviously to help them in this case, to a sense that most Americans probably don't even know that there is a Kurdish people or that there is a place that might be considered Kurdistan because it doesn't appear on our maps. It's not something our politicians talk about or advocate for. And something I noticed in the news recently, a general, his name is General Joe Votel, has been he was kind of secretly deployed, I guess. No one really knew it wasn't like a scheduled public visit to the Syrian Defense Forces, which I understand are mostly Kurdish in nature. And this has sparked a little bit of outrage from, I think Erdogan, the leader in Turkey, has told us we shouldn't trust the Kurdish people, that they won't keep fighting ISIS when things get tough, things like that. And I just wanted to get your response on some of this current event stuff that's going on with the U.S. general reaching out to these Kurdish fighters in Syria.
Well, not so long ago, let's say 20 years ago, maybe even more recently than that, it was almost impossible for Kurdish officials, even from Iraqi Kurdistan, and I've explained the good relationship we've had with the United States. It was very difficult, maybe impossible, for officials from Iraqi Kurdistan to meet U.S. or British government officials inside their own offices. And quite often the meetings had to take place in a cafe or a restaurant down the road from the State Department. So we've come a very, very long way from those days. And last year, for example, in May 2015, President Barzani, who's the president of the Kurdistan region, met with the President Obama and Vice President Biden in the White House. And he has actually been to the White House on several occasions. And so this visit by General Votel to meet the Syrian Defense Forces and particularly the Kurdish forces is really a remarkable turnaround. And I think also it's a recognition of the vital role that the Kurdish fighting forces are playing against ISIS, both in Syria and in Iraq. It is the Kurds, it is the Peshmerga in Iraqi Kurdistan, the Syrian Kurdish fighters in Syria who are fighting ISIS the most, who are the most brave, I would say, and the most successful. I'm sure many people will say I'm biased, but I think there's a lot of evidence to back what I'm saying.
Okay, Bayan, we have a caller who's been waiting quite a while to visit with you. Let's get him on. Dave, you're on with Bayan. Go ahead.
Yes, I've read that the government of Baghdad is mainly the blocking force for sending weapons, heavy weapons to the Kurds, and I was wondering what you thought of that.
Thanks, Dave.
Well, yes, we're part of Iraq, and Baghdad is still our capital, and in theory, the federal government of Iraq represents all of us. But the reality is quite different. Baghdad is definitely reluctant for the United States or any of the coalition partners to send heavy weapons to the Kurdistan region, even though our Peshmerga are fighting ISIS on a daily basis, even though we are protecting 1.5 million fellow Iraqis who have fled to Kurdistan, including the Christians and Yazidis who feel there is nowhere else in Iraq that they can go to without being harmed. So it is absolutely an obstacle for us, and it is something that makes it very difficult for our leadership when we confront our public. The public opinion in Iraqi Kurdistan, and don't forget we have a very young population, like much of the Middle East. The population of Iraqi Kurdistan is very young. And they look at the leadership, our leadership, and they say, why are we still part of Iraq? They don't help us in the war. They don't help us with the humanitarian crisis. They're not even giving us our budget anymore. Why are we still part of Iraq? And this is what the Kurdish leadership has to deal with.
All right, we have one more caller, Eric, who is actually a veteran who served there from Kurdistan. Eric, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It's more or less than a question, but more a statement that we really, I believe, I was there in 04-05. I was with the infantry. I was in Kirkuk for most of my tour. So I fought primarily with Peshmerga and other Kurdish forces. These are people we need to support. This is, when I was there, I mean, we came away with the feeling that we knew, the guys are in my unit and stuff, that when we left, that eventually there would be a Kurdistan, and it'll be a much better place. They run a beautiful society. We worked with Iraqi police forces that were essentially Kurdish in the area, but they also had Arabs, they had Turks, they had Christians, and it was everybody who wanted to work together. They had no problem, and it wasn't about what background you were, but that you wanted to live a peaceful life. And I think that this is, that they're finally moving towards getting their own country is an amazing thing, and I think it's wonderful, and we should support them as much as possible.
Eric, thanks for your call, and thanks for your service, by the way. So, Bayan, we're up against a break. Can you hang on for 1 minute?
I think I may actually have to leave.
Oh,
I
so
apologize
sorry.
for that.
Okay.
Well, Bayan, thank you
Can
so
I
much
just say
for...
something to...
Yeah,
please.
I really want to thank the gentleman who just spoke for his service, for his part in liberating Iraq and giving all of us in Iraq, but particularly Kurdistan, the opportunity to have democracy. And we will never forget what people like him have done for us.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure visiting with you, and we certainly hope you can be on with us again.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Bayan.
Bayan, take care.
Bye-bye. All right. We're up against a break. We'll be right back. 1 minute timeout, and so stay with us. Coming right back. All righty then. Now we find ourselves in a little kind of a funky position here where we have 6 minutes. Unfortunately, she couldn't stay with us for the rest of our time together, but we have like 5-6 minutes.
I bet we can carry this.
I bet we can.
We've been given a lot of material for discussion. Hopefully we'll have a few people that wanted to call in that still will. So, John, Peter, your thoughts, were there some things here that you did not know? You're thinking in terms of how our policy, especially for the next president, I mean, this is one of the issues that, right now, I don't think Obama wants to be stepping into this. But it seems that the picture is getting a little bit more clear that it's moving in this direction if you want a reliable and sound ally on the ground there, that the Kurds may represent that opportunity. So if you're Trump or you're Hillary, that's going to have to be part of some of the policy decisions they make.
Yeah, I think that if you're ever going to have a Kurdistan, you have to have a strong vocal proponent from the United States, because otherwise the countries in the region just aren't going to let that cobble together.
Well, let me ask you this, and again, you guys know more about this than I do. Is there a united voice of Kurds, since they live in all four of those countries?
Yeah.
Is there a united sort of party, if you will, that someone in leadership in the United States could say, hey, we're going to invest in you as a party, and it doesn't matter where the borders you live in, we're going to help you because you're pulling together, you're fighting together, that sort of thing.
So you'll notice that we've done a lot of aid in Iraq, and we've done a lot, and we're starting to do more in Syria. These two countries are the easy part of the puzzle, because these are the countries that are war-torn and desperate, and everything's gone to hell, so it doesn't look so bad that we're trying to fight ISIS in these countries. Sure. The country that is the biggest outlier in our political conflict is going to, I think, be Turkey. Turkey is an established kind of Western relationship. It's long-time relationship with the EU. It wanted to be a member of the EU, for crying out loud.
It's a member of NATO now.
It is a member of NATO. So there's a lot of connections with Turkey, and yet Turkey won't let Kurdish be taught in the public schools. Turkey...
It's a little like Saudi Arabia, maybe.
It really is. And when it comes to the way it treats the Kurdish people, they're basically punished for being Kurdish. And so there's this, and they're afraid of uprisings. They're afraid of losing the territory that the Kurdish people occupy. And so any kind of negotiation for a Kurdistan that doesn't look something like Alaska does with Canada in the middle is going to be really hard with that political piece on the table.
And again, you guys know more about this. The areas that the Kurds occupy in these four countries, is it rich anyway in natural resources?
Oil.
Is there oil? Is
Northern
there gas?
Iraq, Kurdistan has a substantial amount of oil.
Well, no wonder they won't let it go there.
Well, and she mentioned this, that there's supposed to be a sharing agreement of revenue with the different components of Iraq. They are not getting that right now. In return, they're not sharing their oil revenue with the Iraqi government. So we've got a little bit of a stalemate. But I want to go back to something that when you posed a question about these four distinct areas, let's not forget that the uniformity of the country, of the regions, of the people, they may be Kurds, but there's still differences. Mm-hmm. So think about what we opened up with Sykes-Picot. Are we going to get involved again in making some of these determinations?
Are we going to start nation building?
Are we going to start nation building where you've got Kurds in Iran? Now, do they necessarily want to be a part of the Kurds in northern Iraq? So I think it would require much more nuanced understanding
Let me
of
ask
the
you this.
distinct areas.
How big a country would Kurdistan be if they took all the parts of where the Kurds live and smushed them into one
it
country?
Would be,
Smushed.
Think of an arc from Iran,
Right.
going through northern Iraq, going through Turkey, going through Syria. It would be substantial. Just think of the
Would
complications.
it be bigger than
of-
Iran?
No.
I don't think it would be bigger than Iran. No, it would not.
Okay.
But think of the
It
complications.
would be bigger than Syria.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is in itself would be a very substantial landmass.
It would be about the size of Iraq.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're talking about regulatory issues, you're talking about borders, you're talking about all the things that you as a nation then would have to set up and negotiate with the current owners of that landmass, which I don't think they're going to be very agreeable to this.
I think
Look,
not.
What are the lessons that we should have been learning from the last 100 years? Are we willing to repeat some of that again? Who's going to follow through?
Well, but a lot of these owners of the landmass are absentee, right? Syria and Iraq are great examples. The whatever rule there is chaos most of the time, and if in the regions that the Kurds occupy, they're the only thing that is signifying a departure from anarchy.
Well, let me ask this: would the powers that be, the United States, the Russians, whatever, would they object to the Kurds just moving in and taking over Syria?
Heck yes. I mean,
They would.
Well,
Look,
they would. They might do it on. I don't think the U.S. would say one thing or the other. Well, taking over all of Syria.
Yeah.
no.
That would never
it
happen.
just
The
doesn't
Russians
happen.
would definitely have a problem
Well,
with that.
you got the Russians, you've got the U.S., you've got a guy called Assad who still happens to be there, who may have an issue with this. I mean, the multifaceted complexity of this, Peter, is such that it's almost mind-boggling to even think, which, again, I want to hear from our two candidates that are going to be running for president of how they would approach this, but I don't think you're going to hear that discussion. It's
No.
too complex right now.
We're going to take. First, we got to take all the oil, and we send all the emails. We delete the emails so that no one knows what we did.
And then we have to build a wall.
Build a wall to make a new Kurdistan.
Right.
I think that's about it. I think we got
And
it.
then we'll standardize all the tariffs and the trade negotiations.
And give the Kurdish people $15 an hour.
Right. Yeah,
That's a
and then
great
once we
idea.
introduce fast food restaurants into the
Yeah.
entire region,
Absolutely.
we've got them. They're
Done.
ours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Problem
There
solved.
you go.
And free college for all Kurds.
Of course.
Okay, Memorial Day weekend coming up, ladies and gentlemen. We will be gone on Monday. We're actually taking a day off. However, Health Talk will be on, and from 8:30 to 9, then we'll have holiday programming, and then John and I will be back to go. Well, tomorrow's Friday. We still have Friday yet, so
Well, I'll be here for
I'm a little
the
bit-
show, but then I'm leaving.
I'm a little bit ahead of myself. So anyway, you guys have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow as we get ready for Memorial Day weekend. Have a good one.